Welcome to the Women on the Wall Communication Team Conference call. So I want to kind of break this down a little bit so people understand this shift away from the academics, reading, writing, math, and history to this more affective domain, which is now how the legislation reads in ESA, the Every Student Succeeds Act. We've seen in Texas, even though we said no to the Common Core national standards, we have been implementing the same framework, if you will, of the college and career ready standards. And they did it through state legislation, Senate Bill 1557, that brought in TASA's new vision for public education. And I know, Lynn, you have done a lot of research and looked at kind of who was behind that vision for public education. Can you talk a little bit about what you found?
I would love to.
Vision?
I think this is so important this needs to be shared with all school administrators. They need to understand that they are being manipulated, and they're all trying to do good work. They're trying to educate kids, and they mean well, but they don't understand the bigger picture because they're busy. So the thing that really tied all of this together for me was when Ginger Russell, she's a blogger, and she's the one that uncovered the whole C-scope debacle, which is a curriculum management system, which Alice, you've talked about in past conference calls. But so Ginger Russell found this document, and it's from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. It's from June of 2005, and it's the High Performing School Districts Challenge, Support, Alignment, and Choice is the title. So High Performing School Districts. So when I saw that, I realized that this was really how it all began. So it started with Gates, and then I don't know how exactly. There are several people who are in the Gates document who are also in the Visioning Institute documents from the Texas Association of School Administrators, and I can name those in just a minute. But I'll take you through the timeline. So it starts with 2005 with this High Performing School Districts document from Gates Foundation. Then you have on the TASA website, you have the 2006 beginning of where the mission takes root. So this is how the transformation began. 35 public school superintendents from across the state were inspired, they say, to come together to create a new vision for public education in Texas. So they met as this Public Education Visioning Institute. They met for 2 years. They shared their ideas on how to transform Texas public education to meet the needs of the 21st century student. So then it goes into 2008. The vision forms. They talked about innovation and creativity and a thirst for learning. It all sounds really good. They were tired of the stranglehold of the accountability system, and they thought that was inhibiting their ability to develop creative students and let them express themselves creatively. So let's see, it goes into 2009, 2010, the consortium is conceptualized. So this is where my particular school district comes in. So I remember I think it's 2012 that our district was officially part of this consortium. But our former superintendent was boasting about being in this consortium. They had been chosen to join 22 other districts from across the state of Texas to develop high priority learning standards, meaningful assessments, and a community-based accountability system that is not over-reliant on high-stakes testing. Well, I'll tell you, they did none of those things, because when she came back from the consortium, they only raised the stakes on the STAR test. In my perception, in my opinion, things were worse after the consortium than they were before. Also, they didn't do anything about the inferior teaks. They didn't do anything to change the standards. They only got worse as well. So she would brag about that, and I, at first I was encouraged by it. I thought, okay, this is great. These superintendents are getting together, and they're going to do something about it. They're going to take this to the legislation, and they're going to give a recommendation and say, we're tired of this. But that's not what happened. So when I started digging into who was involved in this, you go back to the beginning, and you'll find that it was funded by a firm. It's an architecture firm. They're now called Stantec, but at the time it was the SHW group. So they funded these meetings, this consortium. The people involved were, Keith Stockwell, and you can do your research on him. I think Dave Lieber, the writer for the Dallas Morning News, has done a few articles on Keith Stockwell and nepotism, but that's another rabbit hole you can go down. Okay, so we've got Johnny Veselka. He's the executive director of TASA, or this is at the time. Susan Hawley, John Horn with the Schlechte Center, and you'll have to look up Philip Schlechte. He's passed away, but he was heavily involved in this transformation. You have Frank S. Kelly, and then you have Jeff Turner. So I mentioned Jeff Turner earlier. He is the former superintendent over Coppell ISD. So at the time of my research with the early college high schools, that's when I started learning more about him. He now works for Engage to Learn, which is a consulting company that does project-based learning. And he works alongside another TASA visionary, someone that he co-led this consortium with, and that is Dr. Dawson Orr. He's the former superintendent of Highland Park ISD. So these two co-led the consortium. So what the idea behind this consortium is, and this is in the Gates document, is you get these high-performing districts together, and then the others will follow. So you get them to buy in, and then you can spread it throughout the state. And that's essentially what happened. And just in my local community, where I noticed the transformation is a shift away from academics to this. It's really a focus more on social justice, social emotional learning. It's a shift away from reading, writing, math, spelling, grammar. It's subtle. If you're not looking for it, you won't necessarily see it. But once you see it everywhere. They talk about growth mindset. They talk about, I mentioned social emotional learning, feelings. It's no longer about academics and how your child progresses from, within a subject from beginning to end.
Well, and it's an important point to make that, and we talked earlier about the mandates in ESA moving to the behavioral and non-cognitive. Mm-hmm. And I know on the floor of the U.S. House, there was a Ohio representative who said, this is the new Common Core, is this move to the behavioral. And Alison, I know we talked about the concept of where they're in other states where they're starting it in one district, maybe a higher end district that can afford the technology or wants to bring in. That's definitely, when you look at the high performance consortium and the school districts that were a part of that original consortium, they were your districts like Highland Park, Louisville here in Texas. And it's clearly these new standards, these new learning theories, we're shifting to the behavioral. Are you seeing that in your area as well?
Well, so Pennsylvania is one of the TASA pilot states. So I know those are states that are piloting like social emotional behavioral standards. And I think Georgia and Tennessee pulled out, but I was just pulling up to see what the other states who are remaining. And I think it's Massachusetts, Minnesota, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Washington that are still in it. So that I haven't seen it yet in terms of behavioral surveys, but I think it's interesting because Massachusetts has just rolled out a statewide personalized learning program called MAPLE. It's an ed tech-based personalized learning program, and a lot of the behavioral information they're gathering through devices, and if you hear about gamification of classrooms and that you play games and that there's a lot of data being pulled from how you interact with gaming systems. And so a lot of that social emotional data is going to be coming through online platforms, which I think is very interesting that it's there's a synergy with Massachusetts now rolling out like a major upscaling in their online learning programming within neighborhood schools, that it's also coming along with the fact that they're piloting the gathering of additional sort of social emotional data and behavioral data. So
it's interesting you mentioned that because we had testified, another mom testified at the Senate with me back in August and September. One of the things that we addressed was the digital learning and they're in the gamification. So they have a program called iStation, which is reading response to intervention. And then they have something called Reasoning Mind, which is a math program based on Russian learning theories. And they go through the math program, and there's an interactive genie. And the genie the students connect with this genie, much like they would a teacher. We don't really know what kind of data they're collecting on the students, but I found a document on iStation, on Reasoning Mind it was a Gates Foundation study, and it went into the affective domain. They would collect information on how the students responded with delight and confusion and all of these things that were concerning as a parent. You know, you don't know who has access to this information, what they're using it for. And honestly, do you really want a computer teaching your child all of these important subjects?
Yeah, and I just wanted to sort of add on to that a lot of this adaptive learning software is the ultimate goal, digital tutors. Like the human teachers are going to be marginalized. They may ultimately your child may not even be in the presence of a human teacher, and that you're interacting not only with online systems, but increasingly they're having identities like that online genie. There was another program at Carnegie Mellon that's very much involved with sort of AI tutoring programming, has just been working on a whole system where kids interact with a life-size screen of another child. So they have this cartoon child that is at life size that they're interacting with as they do the lesson. And part of what they're pitching is that your child is going to learn proper behaviors through interacting with this virtual life-size child on a screen. And meanwhile, there are mechanisms for collecting data about your child through the camera systems and facial recognition and different things, which sounds really far out, but it says they've been working on this program for 6 years, and they show great gains with science and math scores for kids learning with these life-size other children that somehow they're actually better than real teachers. And so those of you, just revisiting Orwell and telescreens, I don't think many people are looking at the devices that are coming into classrooms as data gathering devices beyond what you're typing in, but that there are the cameras, there are just the touch screens, that there's a lot of data that is coming in through these devices that people just may not realize how much is associated with it.
Well, and they show this evidence that they have over however many years that they pilot these programs. And they'll say, they showed marked progress with their math scores or their science or their reading. But what's the side effect of this? You know, it's like with a prescription drug. Okay, great, so it helps your vision, but then it causes heart problems. You know, you have the side effects that may be worse than the original ailment. So, you know, isolation, depression, anxiety, sleep problems, all of those things go along with addiction to screens and computers.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's sort of a grand research project, and nobody's like signed off on like the independent review board. You know, there's nobody that says, oh, by the way, we're experimenting on your children the next couple of years with their education. I hope you don't mind.
Well, they always start with the poor districts.
Right. And when you look at the testimony at the state level, at the Senate education hearings, and even testimony from the technology companies to the State Board of Education, all of this, everyone is buying into it, and there is no research proving that it's been piloted and proven successful. In fact, the word, and it drives me crazy now, there's a lot of words that drive me crazy now in education, like rigor and relevance and, you know, all of that. But innovation, which should be a really great word, actually equals experimentation. And so we really don't have actually the research shows that this is doing more harm to students in the classroom than it's doing good. As a mom, it really makes me angry that if I send my child to a traditional public school, to a charter school, or even to pay money for a private school, all of this digital learning is coming into all of these schools because they want to be the latest and the greatest. But they now have access to our children's intellectual property and private data. And nobody is questioning the fact that they're stealing our children's intellectual property. Am I off base on that?
No, I mean, I agree. I mean, I think a lot of parents don't stop to think about the fact that the work that students, when we were in school, we did work, it was on paper, and you got edits back or comments from your teacher, and you brought it home, and you had, you know, and I'm not saying that everything has to be paper-based specifically, but like in our school district, all of our student email accounts are through Google. So now Google promises that they're not going to data mine or advertise to kids anymore. But, you know, there are questions about their past practices, and also, you know, FERPA is so relaxed. Like, many people can get access not just to a child's emails, but anything on a Google Drive, their search histories, their keystrokes. There's a lot of data in a Google account. And so I'm one of the few people that refuse to have, and the other piece is, so their address in the Philadelphia School District, their email address is their student ID number. So there's this unique ID number. So pretty much everything that is associated with that activity on that account becomes an educational record under FERPA, in my mind, because a FERPA record is something that is unique to your student, held by the school district or an entity on behalf of the school district. So everything, and we only can get cheap Chromebooks in our district. We don't have laptops with hard drives. So pretty much, like, as soon as you turn it on and to do anything, you have to enter your email address. It just tracks everything. And my question that no one's really been able to answer is when a child graduates, like, who owns the contents of that Google Drive? Do the kids own their paper, or because they're created in that environment, does the school somehow have some ownership status of the work that sits on that cloud-based server? It's very unclear.